Welcome, listeners near and far, to the Pima County Democracy Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We are stronger together, and we are especially grateful to our subscribers and those who share our content. From the Walking the Walk series to the Legislative Review, from democracy on the front lines to 2 Minutes of Truth. Let's get started with this episode of Walking the Walk. Hello, listeners, and welcome to the Pima County Democracy Podcast, Walking the Walk. We are here today with candidate Miranda Schubert, a candidate for Ward 6. Miranda, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric.
I'm really thrilled. I appreciate you making time for this. So if it's okay, I'm going to dive right in. Let's get a little bit of background. Please tell our listeners a little bit about your personal history, how long you've been in Tucson, what's prompting you to run for Ward 6.
Well, I've been in Tucson for just about 14 years. Most of that time, the vast majority within Ward 6. I currently work full-time at KXCI Community Radio as operations manager. For those of you who aren't familiar, KXCI is a local non-commercial radio station that really centers on community programming. I also serve on 2 City of Tucson commissions, and I've done that for the past few years. One of them is the Board of Adjustment, and the other is the Complete Streets Coordinating Council. I'm also a community organizer. I started a local group called Tucson for Everyone to advocate for housing and transit policies at the local level. And let's see, I'm also on the steering committee for the Tucson Alliance for Housing Justice, which is a coalition of community groups working on a grassroots level for housing justice and advocacy for unhoused folks in our communities. I also volunteer at Casa Maria's Soup Kitchen once a week, making the soup. And I've been doing that it's going to be 4 years this June. I live near the University of Arizona in Feldman's neighborhood with my wife, Moss. We have a puppy named Lionel who just celebrated his 3rd birthday. And we also have a cat named Snappy. And let's see, before that, before I joined KXCI Community Radio, I was in higher education as an academic advisor.
Got it. Thank you so much for that background. I appreciate that. And let's go ahead and dive into sort of local issues. What is it that prompted you specifically to run, to serve as a candidate at this point? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? What would your priorities be?
Well, it really comes down to too many people in Tucson are working too hard for too little. There's too many people struggling to make ends meet. You know, I just read the other day on the National Low Income Housing Council website that in Arizona, the average minimum wage worker has to work almost 2 full-time jobs to afford a 1-bedroom rental. So people are struggling. And all too often, it's the people who make Tucson go. You know, it's the workers. It's the restaurant industry workers, the hospitality workers, the artists, the musicians, the people who make Tucson special, who are struggling the most. So I think we need to bring down the cost of living, but also improve quality of life. I think the key to doing that is to focus on housing and transit, because those are the 2 biggest drains on someone's wallet. And the housing crisis is at an emergency level. We really need to produce more housing to address the needs of our communities. And we need to figure out ways to solve transportation so that everybody doesn't need to drive a car around, because we're also in a climate emergency.
I appreciate that. And speaking from my perspective, a lot of the people that I talk to are very what I'll call grassroots level, or, I like to think that the strength of the party and the strength of our nation really comes from our communities and our neighborhoods. So, I know that a ward office is very local, but just if you don't mind me asking, how is your personal perspective on the national scene, been sort of influenced by recent events and the most recent election?
Well, to me, community is everything. Community infuses everything that I do in my daily life, because I think that that's where it all starts. You know, when you talk about things at the federal level or at the state or at the local level, what it really comes down to is we need to be on the same side. We need to be on the side of the people among us who have the least, who are the most vulnerable, and we need to fight for them. You know, the Democratic Party is going through a lot right now, to say the least. I think there's a lot of hot takes, a lot of grappling with where do we go from here? And I think it's incredibly important to show people who we're there for. And that's why local politics obsesses me so much, to be honest, because it's so direct. You know, when local government isn't working, you can see it. You can see it in the roads. You can see it in the number of unsheltered individuals out on the street, in the crumbling infrastructure in the sense of disorder. And those are people's real life examples of what Democrats are like and what the government is like. And so when it doesn't work at the local level, it's pretty hard to buy into a federal candidate, you know. So we need to improve people's lives, and we need to fight for them.
Would you agree with me? It starts from the bottom up and goes up from there.
Absolutely. I do not believe in top-down change, and I do very much believe that we need structure and we need leadership, but we need to have those things in order to enable a more egalitarian and collective decision-making, because what we have is each other. You know, the reason why we didn't have the results that we wanted had so much to do with misinformation and lies. And the way to combat that is to talk to each other and to create interconnected communities. That's the strongest antidote.
I feel that. What are some of the influences for you, both, maybe personally or politically, or like what kinds of things have you read, or are there any mentors or people in the local political scene who've had an influence on you?
Well, I have to say that when I was one of the reasons I first considered city council or even paid attention to local politics was because of Vice Mayor Lane Santa Cruz. I saw a campaign poster of Lane riding a bicycle. And it was the first time I'd ever seen an elected official represent something that resonated with me. And it was really powerful. So I think that was maybe one of the seeds. I also think when I was working at the University of Arizona as an academic advisor, when the pandemic first started, I was organizing across campus with other folks at the faculty and staff and student level, and we formed the union. And that was incredibly inspiring to me. The faculty members that I worked with, the community organizers who had been doing the work so much longer than me, I learned a lot from them.
Did you have any connections with labor before that, or was that really your first exposure to labor taking power locally?
I would say that was probably the point where it really came into my life personally. I was always very pro-union, pro-labor, but the directness of the experience, the visceral knowledge that the only way that things were going to improve is if we change the system, really was a life-changing experience for me.
Yeah, I used to live in New York, and my experience there was very similar. A lot of industry up there. Clearly, they have very strong unions. And when I came out to Arizona and I first started working for somebody who was very we're a right-to-work state, and said that as though it were a good thing. And then the more I learned about kind of how that impacted people on the ground, on the grassroots level, the less I came to like it. And I saw those abuses close up. So tell me about the changes at the university after they unionized.
Well, I think that what you saw after the union was formed was finally there was a counterweight to the narrative that was being put out there. Finally, real people were coming out and saying what their lived experiences were. It was really eye-opening when I realized that many of the people who patronize the campus pantry are people who work at the university. And I think it's a pretty big red flag when your staff members can't afford to make ends meet and have to go to a resource like the campus pantry.
I think you just touched on something really important and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm reaching into what you just said, but it resonated with me that when people gain that power, one of the first manifestations is they find their voice.
Yes, absolutely. But it's really it was an interesting experience for me to realize that it wasn't just about providing the space, but also inviting people and telling them that their perspectives were important and that it was worth sharing, because it's pretty easy to feel cynical and resigned when things have been the same way for so long. It's pretty easy to start thinking, why even bother? It can be hard to feel hopeful.
I understand. No, I appreciate that. Is there anything else that you would like voters to know about you? We do these podcasts so that people can get to know kind of the real candidate. I appreciate you giving us a few minutes. Is there something else that you would sort of put out there for voters to carry forward as they consider their choices for Ward 6?
It's incredibly important to me to connect with as many voters as humanly possible, Eric. So if there's anybody listening right now who has any questions or concerns, or would like to connect to learn more about my priorities as a candidate, please reach out. Our website, I think, can be shared in the post.
What is it?
It's mirandaforward6.com. That's with the number 6.
Is the 4 spelled out?
And the 4 is spelled out. It's a word, not a number.
Okay, so mirandaforward6.com?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, to me, it's all about being out in the community as much as possible and meeting constituents where they're at and making it as easy as possible for them to share their perspectives so that I can carry that forward to the decision-making table.
So, Miranda, what are you hearing from people that you've spoken to so far in your candidacy?
They're looking for real, meaningful solutions. They are looking for real solutions to the housing crisis, for example. You know, there's a sense of, you know, I see unsheltered people in my neighborhood and in my parks, and they're just getting moved around, and it's not really solving the problem. People want better roads. They want the roads to feel safer. You know, part of my work on the Complete Streets Coordinating Council is overseeing the 20% of Prop 411 funding that is specifically earmarked for safety improvements. And it's been really eye-opening to see how far funding can go when it's targeted effectively. Because the truth is, as is the case all too often with budgeting, there's not enough money to fund everything that's deserving. So what will happen on the commission is that we have a list of projects and a list of improvements that we could potentially move forward. And, you know, in the subcommittee, I co-authored the framework for figuring out how to allocate those funds. And it was basically a rubric that considered a number of different factors, including neighborhood vulnerability, pavement condition, when was the last time the pavement was improved, et cetera. We presented that framework to the rest of the commission to get approval, and it was just a really educational process to go through. And, you know, on the commission, we work collaboratively with city staff and the Department of Transportation and Mobility. And it's a very functional relationship where we are leveraged as the subject matter experts that we are on the commission, subject matter experts of our lived experience, of knowing what our neighbors and our family and friends are experiencing. And then on the city side, you know, they provide the technical expertise and really partner with us. And so, you know, I think that the prospect of putting that knowledge to work at City Council is very exciting to me. And it's something that resonates at the doors. You know, we've knocked over 4,000 doors so far. And when I pitch ideas like we need to build more affordable housing and more housing of all types, and we need to make our roads safer and more walkable, those are things that people are really, really excited about.
Got it. And just to help orient the voters, there's always some timelines to elections. Do I understand you've already got the signatures you need? Is that true?
Yeah, that's right, Eric. We actually submitted the maximum allowable number of signatures on the first day of filing, which was last Monday.
Okay. And then what are the dates of the election that people should be keeping in mind? Do you have those top of mind by any chance?
Well, I know the actual primary election day is August 5th. So ballots will be going out in the weeks before that.
And the primary is in August, first week of August, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, perfect. Miranda, tell me what you're hearing at the doors. You've been doing some door knocking, you've been getting out there meeting the people. What kinds of things are you hearing? How's that been going for you so far?
It's been going really well. We've knocked over 4,000 doors so far and are still running a minimum of 3 canvases per week, though I think we're adding more because it's incredibly important to get out to the doors if you're going to hear from people. Honestly, it's the only way you're going to hear from some people. And I would say the top concern that I'm hearing is about housing. It's about the housing crisis and the growing unsheltered populations that are in our parks and washes and sidewalks. And people are looking for real solutions that aren't just trying to arrest our way out of the problem or sweep people's belongings away only to have them return, you know, a week later because they didn't get any help to get out of their situation. And I think coming right up alongside housing are our roads and road safety, traffic. And I think that that's a result of the fact that Tucson, though it feels like a small town, is actually a big city. And our roads have not been maintained sufficiently. So right now, the number has improved, but still around 65% or upwards of that of our roads are still in failing condition. So people want the roads fixed. They want better options for getting around besides just cars. This has been especially popular around the U of A, where we've heard this a lot at the doors, that they really wish that there were safer biking and pedestrian conditions and more walkability.
I appreciate that. Miranda, talk to us a little bit about what Ward 6 would look like if you were elected. What's your vision? What would some wins look like for you?
Wins for me would look like a Tucson that's walkable, that has a variety of different housing types to meet the needs of its community members. You know, we have such a diverse population here in Tucson doing all kinds of different things, and our housing stock should reflect that. You know, I really come at this from the position of a community organizer and a city commissioner. The community organizer part of me really wants to bring people in, to make it fun and accessible to be engaged in local issues. And you should know your council member, and you should feel comfortable stopping by the ward office and connecting and feel like you're actually going to get help. And then the city commissioner side of me is really just itching to bring all the knowledge that I've learned over the past few years on the Complete Streets Coordinating Council and the Board of Adjustment, and bring that to city council, because I've learned so much about how transportation planning and funding and decision-making works. We've been overseeing implementing the funding from 20% of the Prop 411 Neighborhood Streets and Roads initiative that passed very handily a few years ago, which really shows also Tucsonans' priorities for complete streets, I believe. But anyway, the 20% of the safety improvement funding is something that, you know, there's not enough to go around, right? So we needed to come up with a framework in order to figure out how to spend it effectively. And I think my biggest takeaway from that process is that it doesn't matter so much if you don't have enough money, if you are strategic about how you're targeting it, and if you're looking at the big picture in addition to the small details. And so I'm interested in turning that lens to issues at City Hall, and it's all about improving people's quality of life, and especially those of us who have the least, who are working for the least amount of money, have the least resources.
You mentioned something a second ago about constituent services. If you don't mind, I want to touch on that a little bit. It's been pointed out that in the last general election, more people didn't vote than voted for either candidate, which really is painful to me. It speaks to a deep disinterest or distrust of, you know, sort of the political parties as presented. You know, what do you think solutions are like that at the local level? How would you reach out to people who, you know, maybe feel like they're a little checked out of local politics?
I would knock on their door and ask them if they want to talk to me. I think it's really about meeting people where they're at. I think that I'm always looking for ways to bring in people who aren't already engaged or already thinking of themselves as political, and say, no, hey, this is for you too. These are things that affect your everyday life, and your perspective needs to be a part of the conversation. And so I just want to go after those people and become their friend.
I got you. No, that's servant-based leadership at its core. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. We're going to wrap up here. Again, thanks for joining us today, Miranda, and good luck, and keep us posted and come back soon.
Thank you so much.